Good evening. It's a pleasure to welcome you and welcome many of you back. It's been a long day, or maybe a long 2 days, but I think and hope we're in for a special set of treats this evening. Before we begin, I just want to express some thank yous very, very quickly. To Marla Burns, the director of the Fowler Museum, the Fowler, and the staff at the Fowler. It's been an absolutely fantastic collaborative engagement. We've said it many times, and I'm hopeful we'll say it many times into the future. So it's been an absolute pleasure working with you all. To this, as many of you know, this has been part of a 2-day celebration of the University of California Humanities Initiative that involves the deans of humanities across the University of California, the humanities centers and their directors across the University of California, faculty fellows and graduate student fellows, many of whom are in the audience today. And it's been a pleasure engaging with you all once again. So I want to thank you all for having made this also a special occasion for us all. I want to thank the staff, especially of the University of California Humanities Research Institute, who have worked absolutely tirelessly. They're sort of smattered around here, and will work tirelessly until the last moment of this evening, and then beyond that, without whom my life certainly would not be what it is, and my work is an absolute pleasure with them all. So please do join me just this once in giving them a really warm round of applause. Thanks so much. I was reminded that I have to tell those of you who might be worrying at 9:45 about getting to your hotel, chill, right? You'll get there. So it'll be cool. And I want to thank finally the contributors to this evening, Lu Salah and Lu Yujun, who I will introduce in more detail later this evening, the performers at the end of the evening. But I want to thank the readers and speakers who will be engaging us this evening, and they will be introduced by our moderating person, who's David Kipen. David Kipen is the founder of the bookstore Libros Schmibros, which is in Boa Heights, and a great presence, obviously with an emphasis on the book as we've always known it. So that's rather simply than the one to come, or the one we might think to come. He has been the Director of Literature at the National Endowment for the Arts. He's been a contributing reviewer at the San Francisco Chronicle and elsewhere. And if you hadn't seen the LA Times today, he wrote a piece called "Don't Diss the Humanities," so clearly he's a friend of ours. So without further ado, David Kipen.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here, and you for inviting me to be here too. I was tempted to start by saying that I'll keep the introductions brief because somebody's always bound to say something wrong, and it's usually me, and then I've just been given a very accurate and flattering introduction. So there goes my intro, but let me at least tell you how this is going to work. I think we ought to give these terrific writers the honor of hearing their work. When I was a critic, I always made a point of giving a writer room for his work, or at least enough rope so that they had equal time depending on what I was saying about them. And that's the way I'd like to do it now. We'll speak with each of them individually after they read a little bit. or in between a two-part reading, but we do need to keep things moving along because while I'm shooting for a 9 o'clock end time, we're starting a good 15, 20 minutes behind where we hoped we would. And there's a concert to come afterward. So let's get the ball rolling. I figured we would start with Hector, and as promised, I will keep the introduction insultingly brief. Hector's an LA kid. Many of you probably know his work from the Los Angeles Times, where he has done just about everything but throw the paper into our driveways, which he used to do, if I'm not mistaken, when he was a kid.
My dad did.
Your dad did. So a second-generation Times hand. Hector's books so far are The Tattooed Soldier, the nonfiction book Translation Nation, his newest book, The Barbarian Nurseries. He teaches writing. He's an excellent writer. And as of last year, he's a book critic at the Los Angeles Times with an emphasis on writing in and around California, among other places. So Hector, read us a little bit, talk to us a little bit.
Yes, at first I want to say thank you to the UCI Humanities Initiative for the invitation. It's one of the great honors of my writing life to be here with these other three marvelous novelists who work I've long admired, and also as a product myself of the University of California, first from UC Santa Cruz, where I got my undergraduate, to UC Irvine, where I got my MFA, and where I wrote my first novel. And thank you to both you in the UC system and to the taxpayers of California,
Here.
who funded my education from kindergarten all the way to my master's degree on California Public Schools, Ike, as we say. But I'm going to read to you from just the beginning of my novel, The Barbarian Nurseries, which is a novel that I conceived of in the parking lot at UC Irvine.
One hopes the only thing conceived in the parking lot at UC Irvine.
Well, who knows? This was my response. This opening scene is from my novel, and it's about an immigrant woman who's going to be charged with a crime, and she's undocumented. But it was my sort of response to the anti-immigrant moment, and so I tried to imagine what it would be like, for California to do with less immigrant labor. And so that's where this first image of this novel gets started, and I'll just read from the opening to my novel. Scott Torres was upset because the lawnmower wouldn't start, because no matter how hard he pulled at the cord, it did not begin to roar. His exertions produced only a brief flutter of the engine, like the cough of a sick child, and then an extended silence filled by the buzzing of two dragonflies doing figure eights over the uncut St. Augustine grass. The lawn was precocious, ambitious, 8 inches tall, and for the moment it could entertain jungle dreams of one day shading the house from the sun. The blades would rise as long as he pulled at the cord, and the lawnmower coughed. He gripped the cord's plastic handle, paused, and leaned forward to gather breath and momentum, and tried again. The lawnmower roared for an instant, spit a clump of grass from its jutting black mouth, and stopped. Scott stepped back from the machine and gave it the angry everyman stare of followiness frustrated, of a handyman being unhandy. Araceli, his Mexican maid, watched him from the kitchen window, her hands covered with a white bubble skin of dishwater. She wondered if she should tell El Señor Scott the secret that made the lawnmower roar. When you turned a knob on the side of the engine, it made starting the machine as easy as pulling a loose thread from a sweater. She had seen Pepe play with this knob several times. But no, she decided to let El Señor Scott figure it out for himself. Scott Torres had let Pepe and his chunky gardener's muscles go. She would allow this struggle with the machine to be her boss's punishment. El Señor Scott opened the little cap on the mower where the gas goes just to check. Yes, it has gas. Araceli had seen Pepe fill it up that last time he was here, on that Thursday 2 weeks ago, when she almost wanted to cry because she knew she would never see him again. Pepe never had any problems getting the lawnmower started. When he reached down to pull the cord, it caused his bicep to escape his sleeve, revealing a mass of taut copper skin that hinted at other patches of skin and muscle beneath the old cotton shirts he wore. Araceli thought there was art in the stain on Pepe the gardener's shirts. They were an abstract expressionist whirlwind of greens, clayish ochre, and blacks made by grass, soil, and sweat. A handful of times she had rather boldly brought her lonely fingertips to these canvases. When Pepe arrived on Thursdays, Araceli would open the curtains in the living room and spray and wipe the squeaky clean windows just so she could watch him sweat over the lawn, and imagined herself nestled in the protective cinnamon cradle of his skin. And then she would laugh at herself for doing so. I'm still a silly girl with silly daydreams. Pepe's disorderly masculinity broke the spell of working and living in the house. And when she saw him in the frame of the kitchen window, she could imagine living in the world outside, in a home with dishes of her own to wash, a desk of her own to polish and fret over, in a room that wasn't borrowed from someone else. Araceli enjoyed her solitude, her apartness from the world, and she liked to think of working for the Torres Thompson family as a kind of self-imposed exile from her previous directionless life in Mexico City. But every now and then she wanted to share the pleasures of this solitude with someone and step outside her silent California existence into one of her alternate daydream lives. She might be a mid-level Mexican government functionary, one of those tough, big women with a mean sense of humor and a leonine rust-tinted coiffure, ruling a little fiefdom in a Mexico City neighborhood. Or she might be a successful artist, or maybe an art critic. Pepe figured in many of her fantasies as the quiet and patient father of their children who had chic Aztec names such as Tlitlahuac and Xochitl. In these daydreams, Pepe was a landscaped architect, a sculptor, and Araceli herself was 10 kilos thinner, about the weight she had been before coming to the United States, because her years in California had not been kind to her waistline. All of her Pepe reveries were over now. They were preposterous, but they were hers, and their sudden absence felt like a kind of theft. Instead of Pepe, she had a Senor Scott to look at, wrestling with the lawnmower and the cord that made it start. At last, Scott discovered the little knob. He began to make adjustments and pulled at it again. His arms were thin and oatmeal colored. He was what they called here in California, half Mexican. And after 20 minutes in the June sun, his forearms, forehead, and cheeks were the glowing crimson of Macintosh apples. Once, twice, and a third time, El Senor Scott pulled at the cord, turning the knob a little more each time until the engine began to kick, sputter, and roar. Soon the air was green with flying grass, and Araceli watched the corner of her boss's lips rise in quiet satisfaction. Then the engine stopped, the sound muffled in an instant because the blade choked on too much lawn. So, thank you. That's from my novel, The Barbarian Muslim.
It's so much fun listening to a good writer reading well to a responsive audience. Let me just ask a quick question, and we'll go down the line. But Hector, how has reviewing changed the way you write?
Wow, it hasn't. I would say that I am aware of the variety of voices, especially in American literature. I am aware. I hate to say this, but I'm aware that there's a lot of mediocrity in the world. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. And I think
Is this
that
a cheering discovery, or
it makes me a little bit more afraid. I'm afraid. I'm afraid of slipping into bad habits, you know. But really, also, I've read some wonderful books over the past year that have really inspired me and taught me what's possible. And I think that's what art is. You know, art is taking yourself to a place that you didn't know was possible because a great artist has taken you there. You know. And certainly, you know, reading Mr. Ngugi's Watogo's latest memoir, which I had the great honor of reviewing, you know, took me to this amazing place in Kenya in the 1950s and 60s. That was just a wonderful, you know, trip that I took. And then, you know, Juno Diaz, whose last story collection I read, and the wonderful Yellow Birds by Kevin Powers, a sort of novel memoir about the Iraq War. Yeah, it has helped me a lot in terms of just bringing more voices into my head.
Yeah, I don't know if people know this, but when we critics have reviewed a writer, we always feel strangely proprietary about them.
Yes, because you can really help a book with a good review. Yes, definitely. Yes.
Let's move on to Bharati. Bharati, I won't be able to enumerate all of your books like I did for Hector because you've been so generously prolific. But you're born and educated in Calcutta. Via Canada, you've come to California, where you, I think, are just coming to the end of an illustrious career teaching at Berkeley, so as to devote more of your attention to your work, which has included The Tiger's Daughter, I believe your first novel, and Jasmine, and The Holder of the World, and most recently Miss New India, and also this book, The Middleman and Other Stories, which was given by my old outfit, the National Book Critics Circle, its award as the best fiction of the year. And whose first edition I'm very proud and very careful to carry with me tonight. So, would you read us something?
I certainly will. I can't claim to be L.A. kid like Hector here, but I do want to claim to be California gal, since I've been here now 23 years, and the last 3 of my 4 novels have been set in my neighborhood, in the Upper Haight area of San Francisco. When I came from New York to take up the UC Berkeley job, I said, I'm only going to last 5 minutes in California. I know they're very healthy, and they hike, and they eat flowers. It took me 5 seconds to say, where was California in my life all this time? So I hope you will grant me the honorary status of being Californian. I'm going to read 2 excerpts from my most recent novel, Miss New India. I can't tell you how important reviewers are, so I'm so glad that guys like you with sensitivity are in those jobs. But I came as a student a zillion years ago to the University of Iowa Writers' Workshop, when that was the only place in the world that gave a graduate degree for creative writing. And my father, who was a very old-fashioned guy, said, I need 2 years to find you a perfect Bengali bridegroom husband. I'm looking, but I need a little time. And while he was looking, I fell in love with a fellow student because he had blue eyes. And he was writing about gar wrestling and, moss pickers and so on in damp Florida. I didn't bother to read the works because they were so frightening, but I liked the pink cheeks and the blue eyes. And after a 2-week courtship, I got married during a lunch break. And not only did my life change, but my writing world changed. And so instead of going back and marrying the nice nuclear physicist that my father had picked out, and writing Jane Austenian comedy of manners about Calcutta, people I knew and sometimes made fun of, I did instead have to discover this whole turbulent world of emigration, immigration, and the sense of where do I belong, where do I want to belong. And The Middleman and Other Stories was very much a part of the two-way transformation that immigrants and the traditional heirs to the US have to go through. But in my most recent novel that I'll read 2 little excerpts from, I've suddenly discovered the excitement and wonder of the people who go through internal migration. Within a country, Brazil, China, I've been doing a lot of research on that, and certainly India, where I've done field research. Coming from one language, one particular kind of dead-end small town, into 19-year-old, 20-year-old young women and some men suddenly saying, "Goodbye, Dad, I'm not satisfied with what you can offer," and heading like a Sister Carrie into these emerging IT hubs. And Miss New India started after a phone call, outsourced phone call, call centers, where this woman was calling herself Louisa or something like that, but she sounded so much like me when she spoke English. And we got to talking, and I discovered this wonderful world of young women with ambition performing Americanness during their work hours and then becoming modern Indians, like forget the old traditions when they went back. So it's India's going through the cities anyway, such incredible social revolution, gender revolution, that desire to, that sense of entitlement that I want to be happy and I'm going to try to be happy.
I'm busting to hear this.
So the two passages, just to set up the context, is my 19-year-old protagonist is called Anjali, the Indian name, but she, before she gets anywhere, wants to think of herself as Angie. She answers to Angie, preferably. And after father fails rather melodramatically to find her husband, she makes her way, thanks to some money given her by an old American hippie holdout, teaching conversational English in very small dead-end town in Bihar, which is the most backward state in India. She sneaks out and she goes to Bangalore, which is one of the call center and IT hubs, and is a go-go city for young people who have some ambition and that sense of, I'm worth something, I'm going to prove myself something. In the passage that I'm starting out with, Anjali has no sense or no respect really for the colonial subjugation that her parents went through. Oh, there's all that nationalist movement and independence, imprisonment in history books. But it isn't until she actually lands in Bangalore and finds cheap housing in a room and board place run by an elderly Anglo-Indian who still has colonial views that she discovers what India is like. So that's the first short passage. The Anglo-Indian 80-plus-year-old woman's name is Minnie. One afternoon, with all three of her fellow boarders gone to work, Minnie asleep after lunch, and her servant Ashok off to visit the outbuilding squatters, Anjali did some incautious snooping around in all the closed, unlocked ballrooms, billiard rooms, conservatory, reception hall, smoking room, and the 3 ground-floor bedroom suites with attached bathrooms and dressing rooms. The ballroom floor tilted at such an upward angle that she had to catch her breath to simply walk across it. The dressing rooms were twice the size of the room in which she and her mother used to sleep. 2 sets of curtains, one thick and one sheer, hung from a velvet-covered pelmet above each window. Sparrows had nested in the sconces and chandeliers, and no one had removed the twigs and twine. Rats had chewed through the brocade upholstery of settees and gnawed on the heavy wooden chaise longue. Geckos darted up and down the cracked statues of cherubs. She was about to sneak out of the ballroom when a row of photographs along the far wall drew her attention. Unlike the usual commissioned portraits of vanished officers with their banana skin helmets, there were wide black and white landscapes, seemingly military scenes, framed in pewter. As she drew closer, she began to feel sick. Sari-clad bodies lay strewn along a riverbank. The faces were young, no older than she was, bodies of Sikhs. You could identify them by their turbans, lay stacked like firewood, walking across among the bodies were uniformed British soldiers grinning broadly. One had his foot on the head of a dead Sikh, striking the prose of the great white hunter. Maybe he was the young Maxfield Bagehot, Minnie's late husband. She hoped he was. If so, all actions and opinions of Maxie and Minnie were unforgivable, and all transgressions by Bagehot House boarders heroic. Another painting featured a distant row of hanged men, Sikhs with their hair chopped off, hanging by their turbans, silhouetted against the setting sun. Bagehot House was a museum of horrors. She felt herself swelling with rage, then venom. There had to be a reckoning. She wondered if other Bagehot House girls over the years had taken the same secret tour, and how many dumps had resulted from their quiet acts of deliberate spite. She was tall and icy. Nothing could touch her. If Minnie had been standing at the door about to invoke Bagehot House rules, Anjali would have pushed her down and walked over her bones. She slipped a silver goblet under her sweater. In school, she'd never really warmed to the history book chapters devoted to India's heroic freedom fighters, and the exalted statues of martyrs to Indian independence had left her cold. I'm Indian, she thought. I'm Indian in ways no one else in this house is Indian. I have no roots anywhere but in India. My ancestors were hated and persecuted by everyone but themselves. I understand my parents now. Finally, she had a test for authenticity. Which side of this picture are you on? Is your foot on my head? Are you a hanged fighter? Or were you laughing at the sight of men dangling by their turbans and women's bodies clogging the riverbanks? Everyone in my life has tried to change me, make me want something else, something alien, and make me ashamed that I must not be good enough. Why should I want to change my name and my accent? Why should I plead for a chance to be allowed to take calls from people who've spent too much money or driven their cars into a ditch? I won't read the second part now, but...
I just want to, yes. That was just the right passage and the right way to go about it. I want to ask you, you mentioned field research. Have you always relied on field research for your work, and has it evolved as you've continued your career?
Since the university, especially universities with fabulous libraries, has always been my home, and because I need to do enormous research in order to get my confidence up, to write that first sentence, and then I don't look at any of my notes, but I compile notes. And for Jasmine, for example, there's one paragraph in which I talk about Caribbean, I call them day mummies, people who look after white couples' children while the white wife goes off and does her interior decorating character.
It's the subject of Hector's book.
There you are. And so I read everything that was available in New York, dissertations, published articles on Caribbean, the tensions, emotional tensions between the biological mother, white mother, who is away fulfilling herself, and the Caribbean women who were looking after these kids, but who had left their own children back in the islands or with neighbor, grandmother in Brooklyn, let's say. So I just need, even if it's for half a sentence, to feel that I know what I'm doing. With Miss New India, I made many, many research trips to Bangalore, talked to every level, and liberated some of the teaching manuals that U.S. and multinational corporations. So there's, funny sections in this about teaching girls like Anjali how to pronounce American words, how to, if the client makes a joke about characters from Friends or makes references to baseball, basketball, you better know your stuff. So.
I just want to interject. I was in one of our great University of California research libraries today, what I still think of as the University Research Library, and which is young, and made a terrifying discovery. This is a library that I had cherished since I was in high school. You go in there and you ask to see a current book, current fiction, current nonfiction, what would be in the front of a public library. This is not the case at the Powell Library, but they no longer have a shelf downstairs of new contemporary writing, books. You got to go upstairs alongside, everybody's previous books going back decades. So if anybody has any pull with the Young Research Library, that's mine for the suggestion box. Thank you.
And I second that. Please.
How did I know I was going to find a receptive audience up here on the panel? Ngũgĩ, this is Ngugi wa Thiong'o. He was born in Kenya. He has had an incredibly illustrious and at times horrifying career. His first book, or certainly his first to find a rapturous readership in the West, I believe, was Weep Not Child. His book, Petals of Blood, no less distinguished, earned him imprisonment, an experience which he subsequently wrote about in his book, Detained. And his book from just last year, In the House of the Interpreter, was met with an equally grateful reception. It too was nominated for a National Book Critics Circle Award and won another award that I voted on, which was the California Book Award. But he has been rumored to be a contender for still other more illustrious awards. And he's been teaching at the University of California, Irvine. So would you read us a little something?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, it's great to be here in this great company and this great audience. But I'm basically a storyteller, and I'm very tempted, even at this juncture, to tell a story of David.
David.
With a harp? No. David with a computer? Yes. I'm tempted to tell the story of how I came into writing on a computer.
Please.
Through the good grace of, or persistence of David Marshall, who was my colleague at Yale University. But I won't tell the story right now. I'll leave it hanging in the air, okay, for future reference. But I want to tell really about the person who brought me into the idea and the practice of both listening to stories and eventually writing stories, and that is my mother. My mother was, she has passed on now, a remarkable woman. I don't know whether my Jerry ever met her. Did you meet her? No. I think she's passed on by the time. Anyway, she was a remarkable woman in so many ways. First, because she could not read or write. She never been to school, so that's the first thing. She sent me to school, But before I went to school, we used to listen to stories around the fireside. But there was a problem. We could only hear the stories in the evening. In the daytime, they told us that stories disappeared, okay? And they only came back in the evening. But when I went to school, I discovered that I could listen to stories through books, even in daytime. So it's my mother who made me discover the story in daytime. And this is how. In those days, when we went to school, we had a kind of tablet. Our own tablet was a slate, with a chalk. We didn't have writing paper, so that I think it was a version. It predates, I think, the modern tablet, actually, because it's one surface. He wrote everything and then rubbed it and so on, you know. So let me just tell you the story of how she made me discover the story in daytime. And then in the second half, there's time, I can read how she made me want to write story. So the school I go to, I have brought a black slate and a white chalk for my writing material. We copy on our slates what the teacher has written on the blackboard. Later, the teacher comes around to grade on the slate, putting an X or a check against each word or number, totals them up, and then circles the cumulative number. At first, I do not realize that after she has graded, I still have to wait for her to enter the number in a register for the record. So I just rub off my work as soon as the teacher has graded it. But when I go home and my mother asks me what and how I had done, and I say I rubbed off everything, she says, oh, then don't. Wait for the teacher to tell you what to do. The teacher also corrects me. Otherwise, I would continue getting 0. And when later she starts writing on my slate 10 out of 10, and my mother asks me what I had done, and I say 10 out of 10, she would ask probing questions, ending with, is that the best you could have done? This is a question she will keep on asking in response to my schoolwork, class exercises, and tests. Is that the best you could have done? Even when I tell her proudly that I got 100%, she asks a question in different ways until I say, yes, I tried my best. Strange. She seems more interested in the process of getting there than the actual results. So I drift through the initial classes, not quite understanding why I have been moved from sub B to sub A to grade 1, all within the same quarter, a skipping of classes that continues from term to term, so that within a year, I'm in grade 2. And still my mother continues to ask, is that the best you could have done? Now, I don't know about the best I could have done. All I know is that one day I'm able to read on my own the Gikuyu primer we used in class titled Mothomere wa Gikuyu. Some sentences are simple, like the one captioning a drawing of a man, an axe on the ground. He is grimacing with pain as he holds his left knee in both hands, drops of blood trickling down. The picture is more interesting than the words, which are Kamau etemete, etemete kuru. Kamau etemete na idanoa, which means Kamau has cut himself. He has cut his leg. He has cut himself with an axe. I tackle long passages that do not have illustrations. There's a passage that I read over and over again, and suddenly, one day, I start hearing music in the words. God has given the Agikoyo a beautiful country, abundant in water, food, and luscious bush. The Agikoyo should praise the Lord all the time, for he has ever been generous to them. Even when not reading it, I can hear the music, the choice and arrangement of the words, the cadence, the crescendo. I can't pick any one thing that makes it so beautiful and long-lived in my memory. I realize that even written words can carry the music I loved in stories, particularly the choric melody. And yet, this is not a story. It is a descriptive statement. it does not carry an illustration. It is a picture in itself, and yet more than a picture and a description. It is music. Written words can also sing. Nighttime frustrates me because I read by the light of an unreliable and colorless kerosene lantern. Paraffin means money, and there are days when the lamp has no oil. Most times I rely on the firelight of an unreliable duration. Daylight is always welcome. It allows the book of magic to tell me stories without interruptions, except when I have to do this or that chore. This ability to escape into a world of magic is worth my having gone to school. Thank you, Mother. Thank you. The school has opened my eyes. When later in church I hear the words, I was blind, and now I see, from the hymn, Amazing Grace, I remember Commandora School Elementary and the day I learned to read.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have just one maybe odd question. How has the experience of writing memoirs changed your memories?
Oh, yes, memory. Memory was a tricky thing, but something I found very interesting in my first memoir anyway is that memories of childhood actually are very, very sharp. Images of childhood really are incredibly sharp. Sharper than I'm finding now in trying to write my third memoir, which is my college days. And I say many things I don't remember by my college days, but my childhood, the images are strong, etched in my memory. And I've got a theory. Well, it's not really a theory. It's obvious that the first images of any encounter are obviously very strong. And as a child, you are meeting new images every day for the first time. So even expressions of fear or love or shock tend to remain, even if they are tiny little events, they tend to remain in memory much, longer. Yeah. But I was very lucky, though, in my second memoir, how in the House of the Interpreter. People who read it will see there's a difference in terms of it's very specific with dates. And even days sometimes. What happened was when I reviewed my school when I was writing in the memoir, and I found the headmaster, Carrie Francis, who was a mathematician and was very meticulous. He kept a log of every day, everything that happened at school since he was a headmaster in 1940, every day. He was very precise so he could summarize everything within, say, 3 paragraphs or 1 paragraph even. So when I remember events, what happened to me in high school, I could attach dates to them and even day. So people have been asking me, how come, your first memoir, there's a kind of vagueness about days, and the second one, they say, Ngũgĩ, your memory is very good.
Oh, I wish I'd had him for a professor. My God. Well, thanks. And Karen Tei Yamashita is also a California girl, born in Oakland, where her father was a pastor, but grown up more down here than up there. Spent a good deal of time in Gardena, and she's had a very illustrious career thus far. Her first book, Through the Arc of the Rainforest, then Brazil Maru, which was set in Brazil, where you spent a good deal of time. And then Tropic of Orange, which is a great book about Los Angeles. It was I believe it appeared in the University of California Press's series of writing about Los Angeles. Karen looks a bit surprised about that, so I'll go pull it down off the shelf and show you. And then Circle K Cycles, and then I Hotel. I Hotel, about an amazing building and all of the lives that were lived in it for so long in San Francisco and what became of it. And it was nominated for the National Book Award just 2 years ago. And I have no idea what she's going to read, but I know I'm dying to hear it. So go to town.
All right. I'm gonna read from the beginning and also the end, but we'll read from the end later, I guess.
All right.
So the beginning of the book is 1968, and the end is 1977. It's not a spoiler because a lot of you lived this, so you know what happened. So this is from the beginning of the book. It's the year of the monkey. So I'm Walter Cronkite Digg, and it's February 27, 1968, and I'm saying the U.S. is mired in a stalemate in Vietnam, and you are there. But whoa, let's back up 29 days to the Lunar New Year. Now, we know the Vietnamese call it Tet, but the Chinese own it. New Year, they call it. This year, it's significant for Paul because on this night, his dad grabs his heart like it's been anti-personnel mined with a BLU 43, what you call dragon tooth. Like it was waiting there in one of those jungle paths, waiting for someone to put his toe on the detonator, and boom. There's firecrackers bursting all up and down Grant Avenue, so Paul can't hear his dad cry out. But he's walking behind through a narrow in the crowded festivities and the spitting lights glittering overhead, only to stumble across his dad, crumbling into a laundry heap on the sidewalk. Bah, what is it? Bah has a vision as he passes, his big mistake and no atonement. When your mother died, he's gasping, for your sake, I should have married again. What are you talking about? Help! We need help, an ambulance. Just the two of us from that time on. Gasp. Good son, only child. Move away, give him air. Now, my son, I'm sorry. In the world, all alone. Maybe he says this, maybe not. Paul can't hear him with all the explosions and the drumming, this Lunar New Year of the monkey. There's a float with everyone dressed like monkeys. They're scurrying around with their wire tails bouncing. Every day for 100 days, Paul tries to hear his father's last words. Maybe he said, in the world, be strong. Every Chinese New Year for the rest of his life, he tries to hear his father's last words. And every year, he will hear something different. Who's Paul? Just one of those sensitive Chinatown kids in high school, senior at Lowell, now orphaned. Isn't his story the story of every kid in the year of the monkey, 1968? Every one of us orphaned this year, just that Paul knows it first. A midnight orphan on the Gung Hei Fat Choi. Who are we to know that our black daddy Martin with his dream and our little white father Bobby will take bullets to their brains? By the end of the year, we are monkey orphans let loose, raising havoc, no daddies to pull the stops. Temper the member, got those wired tails swinging from every rafter. We are free at last, brother, free at last. On the Tet, boys back in Vietnam about to be orphaned too, got their helmets fitting tight, snug at the chin, faces smudged like football defenders, hugging those rifles for a sneak attack, all in camouflage like the VC can't see them. Must be why the Vietnamese get killed. Must be why more Vietnamese get killed than American boys, 58,000 to 3,895. Numbers for Vietnam are rounded off to the nearest 1,000. Numbers for the boys are exact. You do the math, it's 15 to 1. We must have one, Saigon, Khe Sanh, and Hue. We get them all back. We get back the little places too, like Ben Tre and My Lai. At Ben Tre, an officer without a name says, it became necessary to destroy it in order to save it. At My Lai, Charlie Company gets its orders. This is what you've been waiting for. Search and destroy. You've got it. LBJ, the CIA, Westmoreland, McNamara, the wise men, they all say, let us wash our hands, go quietly into that good night. Bye-bye. See you on the Judgment Day.
I can never take it for granted that good writers are going to be good readers, but you're all so good. Karen, let me just ask you, when you write a book, especially a book like this one, which is such a memorial, such a remembrance of such remarkable lives, how much of a responsibility do you feel beyond yourself to your characters? Are you answerable only to yourself as the writer at the chair, or is there a...
No, I feel great responsibility. Yeah, I think I'm responsible.
How do you...
I can say. And, you know, I interviewed over, 100 or more people who are of this period. And, I interviewed them but didn't record them. But and over a period of 10 years, I owe it to them to get it right. Although, I'm pretty satirical and a little nasty. So, I apologize for that, but I hope I got the story right.
Have you heard anything back from...
Well, maybe you don't want to say anything.
Oh, people present.
Tell me. But, now the book is out there, so it's not for me to say anymore. I did what I could.
You did plenty. Well, I hope it's okay if we broaden the conversation. We'll get to you in very good time, but I've got a couple of questions of my own, and it's good to be the moderator. You get to ask some of them at least. Well, yeah, like our host mentioned, I was lucky enough to sneak an op-ed into the paper this morning about the humanities. And one of the pretexts for it was the fact that there's a little teeny uptick in funding for the NEH and the NEA, where I used to work, in the proposed budget that the president has submitted to Congress. But there's also, I believe, is it $100 billion for brain research? And this is for anybody and everybody, as will the next couple of questions. What do you think they're going to find with all that money? What do you think they're going to find about the brain, how the brain works when it's writing, when it's reading? Do you keep abreast at all with neuroscience, or is what you do, does it feel like if you look too closely into it, it won't work quite as well, or at least quite the same?
Well, have you thought about robots?
I think a lot about robots. Mm-hmm. Do you think they'll? Have you read anything written by robots?
Well, I have seen a play in which a robot or an android is in the play. Yeah.
As a performer.
As a performer.
Does it make you apprehensive about?
It was creepy. Yeah. But I thought that the reason for doing it by the people who were doing the play was to make you more comfortable and to give a reason to have an android in your lives. And apparently, I guess there have been surveys out there that say that people wouldn't mind having them take care of them or do their work for them.
I don't begrudge huge amounts of money being spent on mapping the brain or brain research. We writers, painters are different, filmmakers are different. They need bigger budgets and bigger teams. But if that terrible compulsion is there for you to, if you're the kind of person who seizes a story, sees actions and seizes a story out of it, it'll get done. I mean, I wrote Jasmine while I was teaching 5 courses in 3 universities and exhausted, but the momentum carried me. But the brain research and all the medical value that hopefully will come out of that kind of research won't be done by an individual without any kind of resources. And if I think that if I hadn't grown up in the kind of feudal, elitist patriarchal society that Calcutta was going through in my girlhood, where I was only allowed to go to a girls' school and college, do French honors or English honors or both, not science, not even history. That was like too utilitarian. I might have wanted to be a neuroscientist. Who knows? I mean, options denied.
I like to see them giving more money to. I mean, it's all right. I mean, we all gain from technology, from whatever researches they do with the brain. I have gained a lot myself from technology in terms of my health and all that. But there's, I think, one thing with governments, either they are aware of it or tend to forget a little bit, is the centrality of imagination.
Yes, definitely.
In the life of societies, individuals. And there's no area of our lives, even neurosurgeon or work on the brain, that does not involve imagination, projecting either to or forward or in time or in space. The imagination allows us to really to do time travel, explore space. We can move to our homes and back to this place and imagine Calcutta, sort of the I Hotel, Vietnam and back, and so on. And the way I look at it is that the arts, while being products of imagination, they also nourish the imagination in the same way that food and water nourishes the body, and maybe ethics and religion nourish the soul, But imagination also needs nourishment. And we've got the truth of this in history, because even as some of the earliest societies, we can't imagine a society where there was no, even those who live in the caves, there are always rock paintings, there are dances, there are music and so on, and because it helps enlarge. The question of nourishing the imagination is enlarging the imagination, not shrinking, but opening out. And this benefits everybody, including those who work on research on the brain. So more money to the arts.
Well, yes. And since this is the Humanities Initiative, I have to say this is something that makes me pretty angry. It's like I'm a product of LA public schools. I was in gifted programs. I had a wonderful education, but extremely paltry, anemic in the arts. I wasn't taught to imagine, not until I got to the University of California when I was 17 years old, but as a kid, there's this practical streak that runs through American culture and I mean, your question sort of speaks specifically to that. And I feel that absence of in that education, that of mine. I feel that really we need to invest in imagination. They do all these brain studies, and they find out that, if you read literature, that metaphor stimulates the brain. Metaphor makes you feel happy. And so there are all these, techniques of fiction and creativity. I tell this to students. I talk to many students about writing, and a lot of journalism students. And I talk about the power of the elements of fiction: character, theme, plot, setting. And these are things that you can't study in a computer. You study them by reading this 2,000, 3,000-year-old written tradition. That exists in libraries, and that, medieval monks copying down the Odyssey so that we have it today. That's why we have, these words, this tradition. It's been passed on from human to human to human. It's about emotion, history, feeling, passion, all these things. And, it can't be quantified. It just makes me sick. They quantify how many books you sell. They quantify, how many hits you get on Facebook or whatever. I mean, come on, man. It's about feeling. It's about caring. And I've had to struggle against this my entire life. I come from a very practical immigrant family, And so I think that, it just, to me, it isn't so, and especially now in this time where I half of me is, in fiction, the other half of me is in this craft called journalism, which also has this creative side, which is constantly being undervalued. It's like, it just drives me absolutely crazy, and it makes me really angry, and it makes me just want to write better.
I think I want respect for the humanities. It's not equal budget, but that what we do is as valuable, perhaps more valuable, in ways that brain mapping. No, I like the idea of brain mapping.
At the same time, what's it going to be used for?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think let's think of the line, politically and ethically, and the only people who, the humanities is the space in which we're going to make those questions obvious, and also to make inroads into, those kinds of decisions. So, you want the people who make decisions they're going to affect your health and the future of our planet and technology. You want them to make decisions that are critically thought, imaginative, and ethical. And I don't think you do that in any other place. So it's actually at the center of the discussion, I think, that there has to be a space for that.
Well, you're all of you, to varying degrees, Californians. 2 native Californians, two more recent Californians. And I guess this may be as relevant a question for the native sons as those welcome from other shores, which is, when did you first know yourself to be a Californian? Or should there be a ceremony when one becomes a Californian?
For me, I know the moment I became a Californian.
Really?
I'll tell you why. Two moments. I won't tell you a long story, short story. But one actually has to do with my novel, Wizard of the Crow. Mm-hmm. And here I'll brag a little bit first, because it's the only novel I know of. Sorry, fellow novelists. Written between 2 oranges.
Between 2
oranges? Yeah. I'll tell you how. Because I began the novel when we lived in Orange, in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. Then we came here 2002 in Orange County when I finished the novel. And the novel won the 2006 California Gold Award.
Yeah.
Yeah, it won. And this is given to writers from California. Mm-hmm. So the moment I accepted the award, I couldn't very well go around saying that I'm not deny my Californian identity, right?
And how about others of you?
I feel that I belong to a place when I can use it in fiction, when it's speaking to me and I can locate. If I can't do that, and I've lived in Toronto, Montreal for many, many years, but I can't write fiction about them. Whereas San Francisco, yes, Schenectady, Saratoga Springs, Albany, yes, and certainly New York, New Jersey, very much yes.
Well, having been born and raised in California, I think that when I leave California, I've lived a couple of times in my life abroad. 3 times I've lived abroad, and especially when you're you bring all these contradictions that come with being a Californian. And so I live, for example, in Mexico City, and I speak this Spanish that is fluent, but it's not Mexican Spanish, and it's not recognizable as belonging to any other place. And I have all these confused sort of looks from Mexicans, native Mexicans, Chilangos, Mexico City residents. And it's like, where are you from? What are you? they ask. And they want me to decide, are you Latino, are you a Latin American, or are you an American? And my answer always is that wonderful place that I'm from. I'm Californian. I'm from Los Angeles. And that sort of explains everything, because to be from California and to be from Los Angeles is like so many other places in the world. It's this incredible crossroads. And there's a certain, a way of being that we all share here, no matter what our ethnicity is or the way we look, And you feel it if you have two Californians who would meet in Buenos Aires, for example. They would have an understanding among each other about being in Buenos Aires as Californians. And so I think that those times I've lived abroad, I really have felt the openness, the mellowness, the punctuality, and the egalitarian nature of California has always sort of stayed with me.
Somebody write those 4 down. I don't have a pen up here. That's great.
Well, I'm born and raised in California, but I also lived in Japan, and I also lived in Brazil for almost a decade. In '84, I came back to the United States with my Brazilian family, my 2 children born in Brazil, and my experience was that they were immigrants into the United States, and so I experienced immigrating back into my own country in a funny way, and it taught me a great deal. But the Los Angeles I left in the early '70s, and the one I returned to in the '80s, was an entirely different Los Angeles. And the people who were coming into Los Angeles were Latin Americans like us. And so I experienced a really sort of a celebratory sense about coming to Los Angeles, which was a black and white city when I grew up in it, and very much a Latin American city when I returned. And then I lived through everything else, the riots in the '90s and all those changes. So.
Well, come home from Santa Cruz. I'd be curious to hear what you make of it now. Okay, I'm having too much fun. Who wants to get into the act? Are there some questions? There are microphones on either side, so probably the powers that be would prefer us to speak into them, because that's probably more fun than, you notice I'm stalling, that's probably more fun than me repeating the questions. So, and I'll keep a couple of questions in reserve probably, but yeah, let's hear from you.
All right, I'm curious, some of you write between fiction and nonfiction, memoir, journalism, history, fieldwork has been mentioned, and I just wanted you to comment on that process and the shift and what it's like to go between the two.
I have that one.
Oh.
Anybody?
Oh.
Everybody.
Okay, let me try, because I've tried. Because I wear several hats, and obviously they are connected. Because I do novels, but my first love really. Okay, I'll tell you a very short story. Okay, how they are connected. My first love really is stories, the novel especially. That's what I like to do. But theater had a bigger impact on my life, including my writing of fiction. Okay, quite quickly, is because I was once in prison in Kenya, both for Petals of Blood, which you mentioned, but more particularly because of writing a play, I'll Marry When I Want, in Gikuyu language. And I was put in a maximum security prison in post-colonial Kenya by an African government and so on. And in prison, I decided to, two things happened in prison. One, I made a decision that I'll stop writing in English, now writing in Gikuyu language, which was the base of my incarceration. And this had other consequences, But also, I started thinking about the language question more. So, and this led me to different theoretical possessions and so on, including critical theory and language and translation and all that, So it's so, and theater itself, you read my later works like, Devil on the Cross, written in Gikuyu originally, or Wizard of the Crow, again written in Gikuyu originally, there's more performativity in that, including my stint really at NYU as professor of performance, of comparative literature and performance, studies. So for me, quite frankly, they are all connected, whether I'm writing a memoir or writing a theoretical work and so on, they are connected. But the one thing really which connects them is really the idea of story, the story form. Those who have read my books on theory will have noted that I move quite freely from the personal to the theoretical sweep or whatever. I have no problem talking about a specific event and then blossoming out into history or, or theory and so on. So for me, they are connected. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned theory and theoretical writing, because there are these wonderful refrigerator magnets out front. I don't know if you've all seen them, but there are words and bits of words that you can combine and recombine on your fridge. Pedagogy, marginalize, paradigm. And I want to ask, how much or how little is good writing encouraged in the humanities? We're so hip deep in jargon that I wonder sometimes whether those of us who've dedicated our lives to good writing, whether we're writing as well as we can ourselves.
Well, I was a sociology major at UC Santa Cruz, and I think one of the reasons why I never pursued a graduate degree in sociology was because I didn't think I could sort of write that way, for the rest of my life. And, and sort of to spin off this, your question, for me, what I've always loved about writing is just storytelling, like you say. I just feel like that I'm reproducing this sort of oral tradition, but in writing. I had all these crazy Guatemalan uncles who would tell me stories about the village and machetes and vultures and all these other things that always had me captivated. And that's sort of what I'm doing. And I think that in fiction and nonfiction, for me, the one thing is that it always does feel true. You mentioned truth before too. I think that I wrote a novel that was 450 pages long or whatever, and 150,000 words, and I think that every word in that novel is true, even though I made them all up. You know what I'm saying? Because it has this whole sort of universe of human truth that is in it. That I believe, and when I wrote it, I was always in that truth. And now I'm writing a nonfiction novel in which I have to actually be loyal to the truth that could be decided in court if I was ever sued for libel by one of the people I'm writing about, and which is of course another level, another kind of truth, and I think that's what we do, is that we we examine things that feel right to people. They might be startling, but in the end, whether it's in fiction or nonfiction, you feel it's a reflection of the world that you live in, or of a part of the world that you haven't visited yet, but is probably there. And I think that that is it's about communication, and I value tremendously this theoretical background that I have in all of those ideas. And the one you didn't mention that was on there was Marxist.
Yeah.
That I saw that magnet, that's the one I would tear out and put in my refrigerator. Because I was also sort of thought to think about words as power and ideas, the explanatory part of language. And I think that there is a lot of really great writing that takes place in the humanities and all of university programs here, because people are engaging in this very lively debate. It might have its own rules, it might be its own sort of jargon, but it does communicate, and it does challenge.
I think we should have a lot more creative writing, fiction and creative nonfiction workshops, so that people are thinking about the value of words, the energy of words, and especially in English departments, and maybe especially at UC Berkeley, it's post-colonial studies, which is now very much on the wane, that created a kind of jargonized vocabulary, guilt mentality, in order to keep out the unwashed. We don't want you to read them. And I have to tell my PhD students taking graduate fiction workshops or personal essay classes, get rid of that vocabulary, start thinking, feeling, and see how to energize your language. It wasn't always that way in scholarship. When I was getting my PhD, it wasn't in that kind of obscurantism.
Yeah.
And I blame Homi Bhabha and Gayatri Spivak.
Well, if post-colonialism is on the way out, what's on the way in?
Globalized discourse.
Are there one or two last questions from? Yes, ma'am, and you're conveniently located next to the microphone.
I just feel a little bit against the separation of science from writing, because I think a lot of the best writing is about, pardon my jargon, the social construction of science. And I feel that it should go beyond just a rarefied consideration of the ethics, but an actual confrontation and knowledge acquisition of how science is used in our culture. You know, we live in a technocracy, which is the other side of globalization, you know, policy-driven. And I just feel like it's used for neuromarketing and, you know, how to torture people. You know, that's a neuroscience.
Well, torture
and those
is...
are subjects of writers, I think. And, you know, especially like in certain dystopian, you know, or Philip K. Dick, or, you know, that was about power. And I mean, there's whole genres of writing that are engaging with science, whether it's vis-a-vis policy or the actual hard science.
Yeah, I mean, you know, torture is not a completely theoretical subject for all of our panelists.
Well, you can theorize about it. Yeah.
I wonder, I mean, even the presentation of violence must be something that all of you grapple with, perhaps some more personally than others. How do you write about violence in such a way as to give it its weight?
Yeah, I can. One of the writers that really, well, I like many writers, but it's one I keep on quoting from Brecht, and I have a small passage I put my epigram here, where he talks about, you know, in the dark times, will there also be singing? Yes, there will be singing about the dark times. Yeah. So for me, that's really sums up, you know. But coming back to the same question, you know, about my own way of like to look at things. Then when every class I begin with telling my students, you know, there's only one thing I would like to get out of my class, you know, the word connect. You know, if at the end of my seminar you have sort of internalized the idea of seeing connection in phenomena, I shall be very happy. I think I've done my work. But specifically for me, I like the idea of seeing the magic in the ordinary, whether in theory, in drama, or whatever. It's very, very, very fascinating. I was fascinated, for instance, when she talked about that telephone call that the telemarketers from India. I mean, to discover that, which all of us have experienced, but for someone to see the magic in that and the layers, I thought it was very, very fascinating. And I really like that. So for me, whether it's theory or theater or whatever, that magic in the ordinary is really what fascinates me. You know, when I was thinking of David and Toshiba, as I was talking, then I was thinking, okay, David, Toshiba, David the harpist, you know, in the biblical David with the harp. And I was remembering, yes, when I was after I began to know how to read, my first book, literally, was the Old Testament. It was the only one available in the Gikuyu language. So I lived with these characters, particularly David and the harp and his soul, So what happened? I come to Yale, and whom do I find? David. And he gets me right in the computer. He buys me my first computer in Toshiba and shows me how to enter, a save, and exit. Then later, when he becomes dean at Santa Barbara, I go there to visit them, to give a talk there. I go to their garden, and what do they give me? Some plum. Now, the plum is so important in my life, really, because I grew around plum trees. My awareness of the plum. When I think of the plum, I think of home. Home is plum. So it's like immediately, I'm going to talk about something else. I don't know what I was talking about, but then they take me home to Kenya, my childhood. So I'm very fascinated by these kind of connections. What connects with what and so on. Or when she talked about Calcutta, my wife and I once went to India. And we were, she remembered this, we were going from Hyderabad, then flying to Calcutta, and our plane got, something was wrong with our plane. So we landed in another small town somewhere. Mm-hmm. And now we had to be there for a whole night or 2 days, I think, because the spare part was coming from Calcutta by road.
Bad news.
But eventually we went to Calcutta, and there are all these wonderful students who've been waiting for us and who didn't, it was really incredible. So all those connections, they come to my mind as I sit here and here, everything triggers those kind of connections. Yeah.
Oh, well, I feel so grateful for the connections we've made tonight, and so fortunate to have been able to share the stage with you all, those of you who flew all the way down here, and those of you who probably spent even longer driving across town. Thank you so much, and please join me in thanking them.